Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Thursday edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe with Mary Kay Cabot and Ashley Bastock. OTAs are over. We are barreling towards mandatory minicamp next week. 3 days out in Berea where we'll get to watch 3 practices, talk to maybe some players we haven't gotten to talk to because they haven't been in attendance to this point. We're going to talk to some position coaches. It's going to be a busy week next week. So what better time to kind of look back on, we've watched 2 practices. We went to the golf outing and heard from Deshaun Watson there. We've heard from Kevin a couple times. We've heard from all the coordinators. So there is kind of a lot to pick through here. So I figured let's go through what we've learned, what we've taken away from our short OTA period here. Mary Kay, why don't you start us off with something you've picked up on or learned over the last couple weeks?
Well, it has something to do with, with what I wrote yesterday about Alex Van Pelt talking about Deshaun Watson and how he has improved tenfold since this time last season. I mean, that's a lot of improvement, right? That is a tremendous amount of improvement. And you can't really quantify it at this time of year because they're not in pads and all those kinds of things. But you can see that he's got a great, tremendous understanding of the offense. You can see that he feels a lot more comfortable with his pass catchers. And the thing to remember right now is Amari Cooper is not practicing in team drills yet. David Njoku is not in team drills yet. I mean, this is a little bit of a skeleton crew. I mean, there are some guys here, but you don't necessarily have all of your starters out there yet. So I still think the best is yet to come. And of course, we're all wondering if there is any sort of a chance that D-Hop will end up here. Yesterday, we put it at about 20%. It's probably not financially feasible, probably not going to happen, but you can never say never. Even if he doesn't show up on the Browns doorstep, they have a whole lot going on in that passing game now.
If I had to pick a theme of this week outside of DeAndre Hopkins, it probably was because we heard from Deshaun Watson at the golf outing, and then we got to watch practice on Wednesday, and he looked really sharp, especially as compared to the last time we were out there. It wasn't quite as sharp, but things were happening on time. Some of the throws, he made a throw to Cedric Tillman that kind of nobody's talking about. That was just this super. I just had a good angle of it. This super tight window, like it was covered really well, and Cedric Tillman couldn't do anything but catch the football. It was like little things like that. Ashley, if there's a theme, I think, of this week, again, outside of DeAndre Hopkins, it's probably that Deshaun Watson being more comfortable and kind of taking ownership of things.
Yeah, it's something he obviously talked about, right? And I think I mentioned this yesterday, but after that, in 7-on-7 period on Wednesday, when he made that first throw to Marquise Goodwin, that was that deep ball where Goodwin got behind the defense and it looked like a touchdown. He did his little bow and arrow celebration. Like that to me is almost as emblematic of anything, that he is so much more comfortable compared to this time last year, which again, we basically had a whole podcast devoted to this. Like he was still this time last year, like didn't know what was going on with the suspension, was still facing about 24 civil lawsuits because that 24th civil lawsuit was actually announced while we were at the golf outing last year. Like it's all of those things being wrapped up. The suspension was served, he paid the fine, he's going through the counseling. There's still 2 outstanding civil suits, but it's very different than having more than 24 of them. And I think just too, it's that being more comfortable in Cleveland in this offense and just getting to know his pass catchers a little bit better, and then them adding pass catchers who can do things that they didn't have last season, like speedy pass catchers, a guy like Jordan Akins, who has some familiarity with Deshaun Watson because they played together in Houston, a guy like Cedric Tillman, who's a little bit bigger than anybody they previously had in that receiver room. So I think you kind of all just, if we had to sum it up, I think Wednesday was a really nice summation of what OTAs have been and what we've learned these last 2 weeks, just from an offensive perspective.
Mary, we talk about, this is going to be a theme of this podcast all season, Deshaun Watson and how comfortable he looks in this offense. And we touched on a little bit yesterday. kind of trying to dissect what we're seeing in OTAs when there isn't really much of a pass rush, a lot of 7-on-7, a lot of installation. Jim Schwartz is mixing up his defenses a lot, so it's not always 1-on-1 or ones versus ones. Sometimes you see the second group out there or another set of corners out there. But how do you kind of, as you're watching Deshaun Watson, what are the things you're looking for that make you kind of feel like, okay, this has taken those steps forward, at least to this point that they needed to take?
Well, there are a number of things that you can take away from these practices. I would say that one of the things is just accuracy. How is the ball coming out, and is it going where it's supposed to go? Is it on the ground, or are receivers catching the ball? So the connection between Deshaun Watson and his receivers has been very, very good. So I think that's been important, even though it's a whole lot easier right now without any of the contact, without any of the pads, without any of the rush. It still has to look good and sharp from that standpoint. And it has. I like to look at footwork. I really, really enjoy watching his footwork because it's so darn good. And he practices it a lot. He really, really works on it. And it's very polished. He's very, very agile in that regard. Once we get to training camp again, we will see him after some practices, go off to the side and just drill and rep that footwork over and over and over again. Again, I'm very anxious to see what it's going to look like when Amari gets out there and David Njoku gets out there and Nick Chubb. I mean, your Pro Bowl, some of your best players on offense are not there right now. But it's still looking good. I think Elijah Moore and Deshaun are developing a really nice rapport. And I think that's going to be key. I think Elijah is the kind of player that's going to really flourish with Deshaun. And I think the Browns are really excited about him. I think Deshaun is really excited about him. And he's one of the major reasons that if they don't get D-Hop, which they probably won't at this point, that they can still be really excited about how they upgraded their receiving corps.
Ashley, what did you take away from